The wind scraped red dust across the New Mexico wasteland like a rasp against old bone, and Samuel Hargrove rode through it hunched over his saddle, a man who expected nothing from the plains except sun, silence, and the cruelty of nature. He was not always a man of solitude. Once he had commanded respect in cattle drives and poker saloons, but years of drought, broken promises, and graves beneath juniper trees had carved him into a different shape. His old bay mare, Clara, was his last companion, and even she walked with the weariness of age. Samuel rode the land because he didn't know how to stay still anymore. Motion was easier than memories, easier than hope. The storm the night before had been fierce, spitting lightning across the horizon and tearing chunks from the earth. It was the kind of storm that drove birds into canyons and cattle into madness. Samuel followed the washout trail, hoping maybe some wild calves were stranded. He could sell them and keep himself fed another month. But what he found instead was not cattle. It was a small shape, curled like a wounded bird beneath a ledge of sandstone, half buried by wet sand. His eyes narrowed. The shape moved, and Samuel dismounted. The first thing he noticed was the sound, not the gasping of an animal, not the cry of a child. It was a dry rasp, the desperate breath a body makes when it has given up everything except the instinct to survive. He moved toward the little lump, brushing rain-hardened soil away. His fingers hit skin brown, thin, almost translucent from starvation. A small hand. He froze. The storm dust settled around him, and the shape opened its eyes. They were blacker than the obsidian arrowheads Samuel used to trade with locals, and for a brief moment he thought he was staring at something ancient, death itself, or some ghost of this land. Then the child blinked, and the fear dissolved, replaced by a terrible, trembling hunger. He scooped the child into his arms without thinking. Years earlier he might have hesitated, remembering the long wars between settlers and tribes, Apache raids on ranchers retaliating with gunfire and whiskey-fueled cruelty. But now there was no war. There was only this fading scrap of life. The boy weighed less than a sack of oats. His clothes were ragged, woven leather torn in strips, his feet bare, toenails cracked like old bark. Samuel laid him across Clara's neck, whispering softly as though the mare understood every word. "We'll get him home," he said, and Clara flicked her ears as if she acknowledged the mission. The road back to Samuel's ranch was brutal. Thin trails through mesquite, then open scrub, then hard desert flats. The sun cooked the earth in a slow simmer. He pulled his brim low and forced Clara onward. Every few minutes Samuel checked the boy, afraid he might slip away, afraid the child's shallow breathing might simply stop. He thought back to the graves on his property, the 2 small crosses he had carved with a knife after a fever took his first wife and newborn son 8 years before. He'd sworn never again to interfere with the course of death, but today something in him moved like a stalled engine forced to life. By the time he reached the ranch, the child's lips were cracked as burnt leather. His body was hot with fever, but cold to the touch, like a dying ember pretending to glow. Samuel rushed him inside, past tools and boots, and the mess of a house kept only by necessity. He heated water, tore old blankets into strips, and spooned weak broth into the child's mouth. It dripped down the boy's chin, and Samuel cursed himself for going to fast. He'd forgotten how to care for another living creature. Slow, careful, patient. The boy swallowed once, then again, eyes half open. "Easy," Samuel whispered, voice softer than he'd heard it in years. He repeated the word until the boy finally slept. Hours passed. Samuel cooked stew, the only kind he knew how to make, thick, smoky, bland, but nourishing. He cleaned the wounds on the boy's arms, cuts, scrapes, and one jagged scar like the fang of a wolf. The smaller marks looked like cactus pricks. The larger one, that was something else, something violent. Perhaps a fall from a horse, perhaps a desperate run through sharp terrain, or perhaps, Samuel thought with dread, white settlers. That night, Samuel sat by the fire, the boy wrapped in fur beside him. The child's breathing steadied, soft but fragile, like a bird's wing beating beneath cloth. Samuel stared at the flames, remembering the days when the Apache were spoken of only in curse words or warnings. Back then, he didn't know any better. His brother had died in a raid. His uncle, too. He had carried hate like a badge. But since then, Samuel had learned hard truths. Hatred never buried itself. It simply waited for new blood to spill. 2 nights passed before the boy woke fully. Samuel fed him slow spoons of stew. The child didn't speak, but his eyes observed everything: the rifle over the hearth, the boots by the door, the worn saddle blanket Samuel used as a tablecloth. Samuel asked his name. The boy looked at him with a stare that belonged to someone who had seen things beyond his age. No response, not a word. Samuel sighed. "Well, you're alive. That's enough for now." He gave the boy a spare shirt, cinching it around him with cord so it wouldn't slip. The sleeves hung past his elbows. The child looked like a ghost inhabiting clothing too large. He ate carefully each day, little by little, as Samuel chopped wood, mended fences, and wondered what in God's name he was going to do when someone from town found out. Bringing an Apache child to your ranch was tantamount to inviting revenge. But Samuel wasn't afraid anymore, not of townsfolk, not of tribes, not of death. Loneliness was the only thing that still frightened him. On the 4th morning, the sun rose like a wound across the desert horizon, painting the land in stripes of gold and crimson. Samuel was outside, hauling water. The boy sat inside by the fire, wrapped in a wool blanket, half asleep. Clara grazed in the corral, and a hawk circled high above the cottonwoods. The wind shifted. Samuel felt it before he heard the hooves 3 sets, light but swift, cutting across the plain like knives through silk. He turned. 3 riders approached, dark hair braided, dresses lined with beads and dust. They were not raiders. They were something older, heavier with grief and intent. Samuel recognized the patterns on their belts and the way they sat their horses. Apache women, warriors of resolve rather than blade. His pulse thudded. They came straight to the door. They did not shout. They did not threaten. When they dismounted, one of them stepped forward, a woman of middle age, sharp-eyed, with a face carved by wind and hardship. She looked at Samuel, then passed him toward the doorway, where the boy now stood trembling, and in a voice firm enough to split stone, she said, "You found our son. Now we will decide what becomes of you. If you're enjoying this Wild West story where every choice has a price and every life has meaning, subscribe to the Heartland Diaries."